What beauty was like in Genghis Khan's era. Introduction. In the early 13th century, Genghis Khan was not only one of the most powerful men in the world, but he also had a reputation as a lover of art. One of his favorite pastimes was collecting beautiful women. After all, everyone knows that Genghis Khan had many wives and concubines. Most famously, Bort, also known as Nur-in-Quilab, who became his favorite wife after she had her teeth dyed black so that she would look more like him. But what did this mean for beauty at the time? So in this video, we'll take a look at what beauty was like in Genghis Khan's era. So watch the video until the end. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. The Mongol leader was said to be particularly fond of women with pale skin and plump breasts. He also favored blonde hair, so much that he ordered one of his sons to dye his locks blonde as well. Genghis Khan was a strong leader who ruled over an enormous empire from 1206 to 1227 CE, which included parts of modern-day China, Russia, Central Asia, and Mongolia. He grew up during a time when warfare was common for kings across Eurasia. After all, there weren't many other options at the time. So if you were born into royalty or nobility in this era, which would have been quite rare, then chances are high that your life would include lots of bloodsheds. But not just any bloodshed. It would mean fighting against other noble families or tribes, as well as governments trying to take control over your land. Genghis Khan made sure everyone knew how skilled he was at commanding men into battle. This helped him establish himself as king by defeating rival clans while spreading fear among others' territories through military force, including mass executions such as hanging prisoners upside down until they died. It is said that Genghis Khan himself was a redhead with a large forehead and green-blue eyes. He also had a very large head for his size. He stood at 6 feet 6 inches. His height is thought to have been over 7 feet tall. Genghis Khan's personality was dominated by his intellect and ambition, which often led him into trouble with other rulers such as Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis. However, he did not let this stop him from reaching success in battle or diplomacy by any means necessary. While Genghis Khan was a great leader and conqueror, he also had a great love of women. He had many wives and concubines, but he also took the time to see each woman as an individual. Most importantly, while some leaders might have been interested in appearance alone, Genghis Khan's son Tului was rumored to be the best-looking man in history. Genghis Khan cared about intelligence as well. Some sources say that Genghis Khan's wives were often beaten if they did not show him enough respect or were found not as intelligent as other women in his harem. However, other sources claim these stories were exaggerated for propaganda purposes by Mongolian historians who wanted praise for their rulers. Many women in the royal courts in China and other parts of the Mongol Empire painted their faces white, because white-faced Mongol women were considered the most beautiful. Their white skin was a sign of wealth, health, and beauty. Some even believed that it was an indicator of nobility and purity. The white complexion also made them appear more attractive to the male gaze, so many men were drawn to them as a result. But one thing you might not know is that the white paint that many women in the royal courts of China and other parts of the Mongol Empire used to paint their faces was actually toxic. It came from lead, which made them look whiter, but it also killed them. This is because lead allows your skin to turn white over time if you're exposed to too much of it over time, and many people did. The side effect of this lead exposure was that women's faces would turn an unappealing yellowish color after years of using this kind of cosmetic product. The traditional Mongol clothing consisted of a robe that came down to below the knee and had long sleeves. They wore it with a belt around the waist. It was made of either cotton or wool, usually black or gray in color. Women also wore headscarves and shoes made of wood or leather. The main purpose of these garments was to cover the head, which was considered a sign of modesty, respect, and authority among women. The practice also showed wealth, as most women had little access to materials such as silk or wool at the time. By wearing them, they wanted their beauty to show through more than just their clothing alone. They wanted others, men, to know what kind of woman they were, whether it be by her actions or appearance. The shape of a woman's hair was symbolic. In this respect, Genghis Khan's era is similar to ours in that women do wear their hair with shaved temples and sideburns, but the shape is different. It's in the shape of a flightless bird's wings. This tradition goes back to ancient times and can be found throughout China, Korea, and Japan. It has been passed down through generations from generation to generation. In fact, many people believe that this haircut was designed by Confucius himself. He said, "A woman should keep her head covered because she seems like an ugly duckling when she doesn't cover up her face." Women were allowed to change their hairstyles, but not if the husband had chosen them. If he was unhappy with her new look, he could send her back home and get another wife who would be happy with his choice. The Mongols had hennas. Henna is a plant that grows in the Middle East, and it's used to dye hair and skin. In the Mongol era, women would apply henna to their hair for special occasions like weddings or funerals. The henna was a natural red color, but when applied to the scalp, it turned greenish-brown. Henna has been used as a dye since ancient times. Some scholars think that Alexander the Great may have invented it during his campaigns in India, although this is debated. The term henna comes from an Arabic word meaning to be red. It's also known as mendi because of its use on hands and feet during wedding ceremonies in some cultures around the world. But that's not all. Husbands also got to choose their wives' clothes and makeup. They may have been given strict guidelines about how they should dress, but they still had some say in what their women wore on a daily basis. Now, if a woman lost her husband, she would shave off her eyebrows and cut off her hair. This was a sign of mourning for the death of a loved one. Mongol women would also shave off their eyebrows as a sign of mourning for Genghis Khan. In fact, many historians believe that this is why Mongol men were able to conquer so many lands during his reign, because they had no choice but to follow suit with their wives. They also wore jewelry, and the jewelry was all about bright colors. Tulips and lotus flowers were popular motifs, as were butterflies and other insects. Pearls, jade, turquoise, these were the materials that adorned the necks of women in Genghis Khan's era. To put it simply, this stuff was heavy. It took 2 people to carry one piece around with you on your upper body, unless you could afford someone who would do it for free. And because these pieces were so expensive, they were usually worn by those who could afford them. In the 13th century, teeth were often dyed black for a wide smile effect. The reason behind why this was so popular is that it made your teeth look bigger and more prominent, which was considered attractive by many men. Teeth were stained with a mixture of vinegar, herbs, and ash, which produced a dark grayish shade when combined with tooth enamel, the layer next to the pulp. This dye could also be applied to make them look like pearls or jade, or even black lacquer. Beauty standards have changed over time. In the past, beauty was more about how you looked than how you felt. Today's society has changed this completely, and now it's all about your feelings and what people think of them. The way we define beauty has a lot to do with where you live, who your friends are, what kind of job you have or don't, where you grew up, etc. But even though there are many different ways for people to define their own forms of beauty, it doesn't mean that everyone agrees on its definition. Some people prefer thin frames while others prefer fuller ones. Some people may prefer long hair while others prefer short ones. Some might like brown eyes while others prefer blue ones. Conclusion: as you can see, the Mongolian Empire had different beauty standards at different times in history. In Genghis Khan's time, women were expected to be pale-skinned and have plump breasts. But when he died in 1227 CE, his empire collapsed. And not long after that, man began to take over power. Nowadays, we think of him as one of the greatest leaders ever born, or perhaps even as a monster because he was so bloodthirsty and brutal towards his enemies. We hope you found this video interesting and informative, and if you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.